crawling around on the top of your roof during the middle of a hurricane is not the greatest place to be. But that's where I found myself on Monday morning. My wife and I live in a townhome that was built back in the 70s, so we have these flat roofs that oversee the carport. So as we were trying to get ready to leave our house during the hurricane, we noticed that water was leaking into our room there where we watched TV. So we went up to the second floor and we looked out on our roof, and there was a swimming pool that was knee deep because the leaves had backed up the gutters. And we said, we've got to do something about this, because if not, the roof's going to cave in and crash both cars. So in the middle of Burrell, I got into the bathing suit, white t-shirt, got outside, crawled on all fours around this very slippery surface. I didn't want to stand because it was 60-mile-an-hour wind. It was craziness, okay? I was pulling leaves off, throwing them over the edge, pulling leaves off. I would go back inside, kind of wait for a lull, crawl back out, get more leaves out. Crazy. Until finally the water started to flow, it subsided, and we were able to make it out. Now, we all have our storm stories over the years. If you've lived in Houston 2-3 years, you're going to have a storm story that's kind of crazy like that. So I'm glad to be here today. I'm glad to have made it through. And you know, there are a lot of people here today who worked the entire week just to make this worship service possible. Our tech team, our staff, and our choir, yes. Wild. Storms, right? You can't predict the storm. We think we can, and then we can't. But you know, life is the same way. We have literal storms that hit our city, and it messes us up, and we all feel discombobulated and frustrated. And then we have those storms that hit our life. And sometimes when we have a storm that hits our life, or perhaps it's a storm that we've created of our own making, we find our place hitting rock bottom. Hitting rock bottom. What does that mean to hit rock bottom? It means that you have basically at that moment reached the lowest point in your life. It's like all hope is gone. You don't know if you can make it another day, and you feel like there's no way you can recover and move on. The Bible is replete with stories of men and women who have hit rock bottom. David had it all. He was the most powerful leader in the world. He was wealthy. He was charismatic. He was a man after God's own heart, but he had a lust problem. He committed adultery. He committed a murder indirectly, and he hit rock bottom. So sometimes we hit rock bottom. Sometimes rock bottom hits us. Joseph had a dream. He had a dream. His brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery. He hit the bottom of the well. Then he went to the bottom of the justice system. Then he went to the bottom of the prison. Rock bottom found him. He did nothing. Job, another story. A great man, a godly man, a family man, a successful man, lost all 10 of his children, gone. Lost his business, his money, had to file bankruptcy, gone. Lost his health, had sores and boils all over his body. He's scratching himself. He reached rock bottom. Rock bottom. It's a brutal place to be. It's a horrific place to be. But sometimes in life we find ourselves in that place, rock bottom. will break you, will humble you. It will crush you. It will push you to the edge of despair. But the good news is, rock bottom is not the end. Rock bottom, many times, can be a new beginning, a strange, paradoxical, fresh start. Because when you hear or meet someone that has been to a rock bottom that's similar to yours, and they've made it to the other side, it somehow fills you with a sense of hope and pours courage into your heart and life. And that's one of the goals of this series as we're looking at the resurrection. One of the goals we looked at last week is that as we listen to the gospel, as we begin to apply resurrection thinking and resurrection living, that it will pour courage into you. So let's open our Bibles to 1 Corinthians 15, verse 9. And we're going to listen to a story, listen to a man who knows a heck of a whole lot about hitting rock bottom and climbing his way out. Of course, the guy we're talking about is our main man, Paul. Here's what Paul says in verse 9. He says, "For I am the least of the apostles, and do not deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church." Paul's passion before he came to know Christ and experience the power of the resurrection was to wipe out people who believed in Christ, to persecute them, to put them in prison, and in many cases have them executed. That was his job description, and that's what he did. But look what happened, verse 10. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them. He's referring back to the apostles, the original disciples. I worked harder than them, yet not I working, but the grace of God that was working within me. Whether then it is I or they, what we preach, and this is what you believe, this gospel of resurrection. When I read this passage, I just thought about these words that jumped off the page to me. He said he feels less than. Do you ever feel that way? Do you ever feel less than? If you don't, all you got to do after church is take out your phone and scroll through your feed, and you'll probably feel less than. I do. What else did he feel? He said he feel like I don't deserve it. I don't deserve where I am right now. I don't deserve God's forgiveness and grace. I don't deserve this new place. So he is kind of struggling with imposter syndrome here as well. Why don't you deserve it? Why do you feel so unworthy? And Paul says clearly it's because of what I did. Because of what I did, Paul said, I'm disqualified to be a Christian, much less an apostle, much less a church planter, because of what I did. How many times do we have the same thoughts and feelings in our own lives, right? You ever been there? God, I don't deserve forgiveness. I can't forgive myself. I don't feel like it. God, I feel less than. Lord, how can I be used by you because of what I did? Because of what I did. But something happened to Paul. And something's happened to many of you, if you could stand up and speak today. And that was an invasion of the grace of God. When he hit rock bottom, when he was knocked off of that horse on the road to Damascus, and he was blinded by the light of the reality of the resurrection of Christ, he began to experience the amazing, transforming grace of God in Christ. So when you hit rock bottom, what do we do? Where do we go? First thing we have to do is we have to look up. We have to look up. You have no place to go when you hit bottom but to look up. We look up to God. We look up to God in Christ. We see that He has died. He has risen in our place. We don't deserve it. We are unworthy. We are less than. That's what qualifies us to receive this transforming grace in Christ. So we look up like He did. We look up and we realize that what He did, what Christ did, is greater than what you did. His cross, His resurrection is greater than Paul killing and murdering Christians. It's greater than what got you to your rock bottom. What He did is greater than what you did. And the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, Paul would write in Romans 8, can indwell your life and raise you from rock bottom. Hitting rock bottom many times can be a catalyst for your need for radical change. Because you're at the end of your rope. You're in a place of utter desperation. You have no other options but to turn your life over to the grace of God. And because the resurrection is real, we looked at last week, His grace is real. Because the resurrection is real, the power of God is able to come in and invade our life and to pull us up out of whatever rock bottom that we have hit. So when we hit rock bottom, the first thing we do, as Paul did, is we look up. We look up to God in Christ. We look up to His grace, and we realize that what He did is greater than what we did. What else do we do? We also look out. We look out. We look out. God had a job assignment, a new job, a new purpose for Paul. He didn't just say, Paul, you're forgiven. He didn't just say, Paul, you're cleansed. Paul, you're my son. He said, no, Paul, I've got something for you to do. So when you hit a rock bottom in your life and you look out and look up to God in Christ, He also gives you something to do. He gives you work to do. He gives you someone to care for. He gives you something to do and someone to care for, and He gives you some purpose in your life that's greater than yourself. Rock bottom could be a catalyst for radical change. Rock bottom can be a path that shows us God's new plan, God's new purpose for our life. That's what Paul did. On that road to Damascus, as God's grace invaded his life and changed his life, God slowly, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, began to rebuild this man from the ground up. I don't know who said it, but it's true. No matter where you are, no matter what you're going through today, if you have a pulse, God still has a purpose and a plan for your life. We look out. Paul said, I worked harder than the rest. I'm getting after it. God has a new plan for my life, a new purpose for our life. I'm going to get these things done. Then he kind of catches himself, doesn't he? He goes, well, it's not really me, but God working within me. God working within me. So the third thing that we do when we hit rock bottom is we first of all, we look up to God in Christ and His grace. We look out to what He has for us to do, a work, a job, a person, a purpose, and then we look in. We look in. He says, it's not I that's doing this. He goes, I don't have the power to face the battles in my life. I don't have the power to leap over the hurdles that I'm facing right now. But through God's grace and God's strength, I am what I am. So we look into this power. Basically, here today, there are two types of people in the worship center, and two types of people that are watching. Two types of people. There are those who have power and those who don't have power. Right? Those who have power, they have a little spring in their step, a little smile on their face, a little hope. Those who don't have power are here, a little bitter, a little angry. They want to open a can on someone we won't say by name. So, when I wrote this part of the message, I didn't have power, but last night I got power back. I was like, yes, yeah, right, yeah. So I'm somewhere in between this and this, right? And then I lost power again. I was trying to go to sleep. Crazy, right? It's just, forgot about it. But the good news is this. If we do have a relationship with God in Christ, if we do know him, his power is inside of all of us. And that's really good news. Because many times in life, we're pushed to the brink. You have a handful of times in your life where you feel like you've hit rock bottom. And you're wondering, how can I make it through this moment? How can I make it through this day? And God gives you the power, as Paul says, the grace to make it through. Not I, but the grace of God in me, his empowering grace. God's grace empowers you to work out what he's worked into you. God's grace empowers you to get up, get out of bed, and to face whatever is on your plate. We look up and we look out and we look in to the grace of God. And then as we're doing here in this 7-week summer series on the resurrection, we begin to listen to what the resurrection is telling us. You see, the resurrection tells you that God brings dead things back to life, right? The resurrection tells you, as Frederick Buechner said, that the worst thing is never the last thing. The resurrection tells you that God's grace is greater than what you did. David cried out in Psalm 51, "Oh God, restore me, forgive me, create in me a clean heart." And yes, there were consequences to his actions, but God was able to restore him and to resurrect David, and he was still known as a man after God's own heart, and he fulfilled God's purposes for his life. Job, the grief was always with him. God restored his relationship with Job, restored his family, restored his business. God raised Job back from the dead, back from rock bottom. God raised Joseph out of the bottom of prison into a place of power, into a place of persuasion, as he helped lead Egypt through that brutal time of famine. God's grace, God's resurrection power is greater than what we have done. You can't let your past define you. But you must let God's grace define you. Let God's grace define you. So if you find yourself in a place where you're hitting rock bottom, remember, we're resurrection people. That's who we are. We are resurrection people because we serve a resurrection God. We're resurrection people. We serve the God who brings dead things back to life. We serve a God who came in and hit rock bottom for us in Christ and went deeper still. We're resurrection people. Rock bottom may crush you, but resurrection will restore you. Rock bottom may humble you, but resurrection can heal you. Rock bottom pushes you to the edge of despair, but resurrection plants a seed of hope by the grace of God in Christ. We could spend all day today, all day tomorrow, with men and women and young people who could get up here today and just tell a story about, wow, I hit rock bottom, but God brought me up out of that pit. Rock bottom was a catalyst where God began to radically change my life with His grace and truth. I can testify to that. I can tell you when I hit rock bottom that God was there. When I hit rock bottom, God's people were there. When I hit rock bottom, God's grace was there. No matter where you are, no matter what you're going through today, we know that what He did is greater than what we did. We're people of the resurrection.